In this part, we're gonna get started with some basic JavaScript programming. Now, if you're already an experienced JavaScript developer, I would recommend you to skip this part because this part is intended for beginners. Also, this is the last part in which we will be working in the browser. In the next part, we will start working with Node and later with React Native, and then we will actually start working inside an Android and iOS app. Now in this JavaScript introduction, you will learn anything you need to know just to get started with some basic JavaScript. We're gonna cover variables, naming conventions, arrays, objects, basic functions, loops, events, classes, and inheritance. So let's get started with learning some basics of JavaScript. Now this tutorial is quite long, so I recommend that you take your time. Also, this tutorial is intended for beginners, so if you're an experienced JavaScript developer, I would recommend you to skip this part of the tutorial. Now for this tutorial, we're going to use JSBin to actually type JavaScript. So head to jsbin.com and I would recommend that you type along as I write. That's the easiest way to learn. Make sure you have JavaScript and console checked in the menu in JSBin, and I'm gonna write all the code here, and then I'm gonna press run, and you will see the results of the code in the console. Now the first thing you need to know in JavaScript is how to create variables. A variable is written like this: var keyword followed by the name of the variable. Let's call this my name. A variable is a container for storing data values. And all variables must be identified with unique names, and they are stored in the memory of the browser. There's three different kinds of commonly used variables in JavaScript. It's var, it's let, and constant. In this tutorial, since it's for beginners, we will only cover var variables. That's basically all you need to know as well to get started. Our JavaScript variable can contain the following data types. Contain an int, it can contain a string, an object, boolean, null, undefined, or a symbol. In this tutorial, we will only cover the following three data types. We will cover int, which is a number. Int is programming language for number. So anytime I say int, you know I mean number. String means text. And string is just a programming language for text. And also we will cover object. So the three data types we will cover is int, string, and object. So let's start by creating this variable, my name. Also, I'm gonna explain something about naming conventions before we get started. This might seem like a lot of information, but it's really necessary that you know this stuff. What I'm using here is called camel case. You see the first letter of the variable name has a small character. The second word has a big character. That's called camel case naming convention. You can also use something called Pascal case, which is written like this. Then you have a big character in the start of every word. You can also use something called underscore naming convention. Would be written like this: all small characters with underscores. Now this is good to know because you can use this as to set a standard immediately before you start just typing stuff. This makes the code a lot more structured and makes it easier to read. So I'm gonna use camel case throughout this tutorial. But now finally we're gonna create a value for this variable and start using it. So now we're gonna assign a value to my name. What you wanna do is create equal with, and you can just type John. Now John is a string. What we wanna do now is we're gonna use something called console.log, and we can console.log my name. Now console.log will just write whatever we tell it to write to the console. So if I click run now, it writes my name variable, which has a value of John. So that's a string. Let's just string. This variable contains a string. Let's create a variable that contains an integer. So let's say var age equals with 29. And let's also create a variable that contains an object. We can call that person. Let's set it equal to, and this is how you create an object, opening bracket, closing brackets. And don't worry about what an object is or something like that. We will cover that later in this tutorial. For now, I'm just going to show you how to assign an object to a variable. So we could say name, give the value John, and age, let's say 29. So this is how you create an object data type within a variable. Now let's say we wanted to display the age here instead of the name. We will just say console.log_age. It's just a simple integer. And let's say we wanted to display the name of the person object. We would say person and then dot. This is called dot notation when I'm using a dot there. And then the property of this object, and don't worry about that, we'll come into that later. But that way we can actually get the same value of like this, but instead we're getting it from inside an object of a variable named person. This is just, don't worry if you're getting confused or something, this is just the very basics of defining variables. All you need is a variable, name something with a value. That's all you need to remember, like this. So it's nothing more than that. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this now, and we're gonna take a look at creating arrays. Now arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. So let's say the variable we just defined, called my name, it only held one single value, which was John. Now let's say we want to create a variable called colors. Now we want colors to contain multiple values. We could just do like this, but then that's just one value, and we can't add anything to this or do anything more with it. So what we will do instead is create something that's called an array. It's written like this, and now in here you can add any colors you wish, and as many as you wish, like that. So now we actually get multiple values connected to this variable in an array. Now let's say we wanted to display red. What we can do then is use console.log and use colors, and then get the index of red, which is actually 0. So if I run this, you see we will get red. And this 0 is actually the index of the array value we want to get. So now an array always starts at 0 and then goes upwards. You get the idea. If we want to get green, I would just say 1 instead, like that, and we will get green. Now let's say maybe we want to add a color to this array. What we can do then is colors and then dot notation followed by a push function. Now within the push function, within this parenthesis, we can actually add a new value that will be pushed to the array. So let's say we want to push the color black to the array. So use colors push parenthesis black, and then let's console.log colors, and let's see what we got. As you can see now, we got black at the end of the array, and that's what push does. It adds a value to the end of the specified array. Now let's say maybe we want to delete a value in this colors array. What we would use then is called splice. So colors dot splice. Now the first parameter of the splice function is gonna be the index we want to delete. So let's say we want to delete red, which is the very first value and has an index of 0. And second parameter is how many indexes do we want to delete? Well, we want to delete only one, this one, right? So now let's clear the console and press run. As you can see, now we only got green and blue left because the red one got deleted with the splice function. Now another thing I can show you is, let's clear this console. Let's create a new array, we can call it numbers. Let's just define a couple of unsorted random numbers like this. And what we can do now, let's console.log numbers. This will just console.log the entire array. Now these are not in the sorted. Since I just specified them unsorted, they will not be sorted in array. So let's say we maybe want to sort them. We can use something called sort function. So type dot sort and then opening parentheses and closing parentheses. Hit run. And as you can see now we got 1, 4, 4, 4, 5, 7, 9, which means that this array has been sorted in the right order. It starts from the smallest and goes to the biggest. That's a commonly used function you can use if you ever need to sort an array. Now another thing we can do, which is something I use quite a lot, is to get the length of an array. Now as you can see we added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers to this array. So if I type console.log numbers.length and run it, you will get 7, which is the amount of values we have in the array. Now let's go on to taking a look at objects. I'm gonna delete this and clear the console. Now, a JavaScript object is a collection of named values, and I will show you what that means. There's two different ways to define an object. The first is called an object literal. The second way is with the new keyword. And we'll cover both of these. We will start by creating an object literal. Now it's written like this. Create a new variable, name it person. I'm going to define an object, so open bracket, closing bracket. Give it a property called name, and set the value to John. Now this is called a property. It's the named value in the object. And all of these, if I can add something more, an integer of age. So now this is an object property and this is always an object property. This is the value of the name property and this is the value of the age property. You get the idea. And also we can add an email, we can add whatever properties we want. Let's just say test@gmail.com or whatever. Now an object property can also contain arrays. So let's say that this person maybe owns 2 cars. Let's say we can create an array, Volvo and BMW. So you can actually add arrays inside an object property, just like that. Another thing you can do is you can define functions within an object. We're gonna do that in just a second. First, I'm just gonna console.log to show you how to get, let's say we want to get the name of this person object. What you would do is first use person.name. If we run this, we'll get John, which is the name of the person. You can use age, email, like that. If we want to get something from the array, you would use cars, and then the index in the array you want to get, let's say 0, this will return Volvo. Now, another thing we can do, I'm just going to clear the console. We can add methods, which is an action that can be performed in an object or on an object. So let's create a new method called getName, declares as a function, which is what it is. Now let's say we want to return the name of this person inside this function, then we'll use this.name. This refers to the current object it is in, so it refers to this name. Now let's say console.log person.getName parentheses, since it's a function, and hit run, and we get John, which is the name of the person object. We could also say this.age and hit run, and it returns the age. That's how to do it with the object literal. Let's do it like this. I guess I'm gonna write a comment, object literal, literal. Now let's see, we can also do this by just using the new keyword. So I'm just gonna write the comments like that. Now let's create a new object. Let's name this color. And now we're gonna create a new object of the color. And this is exactly the same as doing an object literal, except you type it in a different way. So let's say now color.name, or maybe color.shape or whatever. Let's set it to round. I don't know, something like that. And then yes, console.log color.shape. Now we'll get round when we hit run. So now when we're creating the color object, the shape property of this object doesn't even exist, but we're creating it here, and at the same time as we're creating it, we're actually giving it a value of round. So this is two ways of doing the exact same thing in just different ways. I almost always use the object literal myself. It's not very often I have to use the new keyword when creating objects. That's it for creating objects. Now we're going to take a look at working with JavaScript functions. Now, a JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. It's defined with a function keyword followed by a name followed by parentheses. And I'm going to show what I mean right now. So we're going to define a function with a function name followed by the name of the function. Let's call this my function. Followed by parentheses, followed by the block. So everything between this bracket and this bracket right here is the code that will be executed in my function. Now you can name this whatever you want. You can name it hello there or anything you want, but we're gonna say just my function. Now let's type something called return. When JavaScript reaches a return statement in a function, the function will stop executing. So if we do return false, this function will do nothing at all. It will just return false. It will stop executing immediately. However, we're gonna want to return something, so we can return function ran like that, and then we're gonna console.log my function. Click run. As you can see, the function executed correctly. And this is basically it to just create a very simple JavaScript function. Now let's say we wanted to pass a parameter into this function. Let's say we can rename the function to setName. Let's say we want to set a name and then return the name of this function. Say setName. What we can do instead is we can pass a parameter. Let's say we want to pass a parameter here, and we're gonna pass this parameter from when we're invoking the function. So this is the argument of the function. We can just give it the name of John, and we're gonna return the name parameter. So now, when we console log this, what do you think we will get for result? We will get John, which is the name that we're setting when we're calling the setName function. Now you can pass multiple parameters. Let's say we're gonna pass some numbers, some integers. So we can just say basically P1 and P2. And let's pass number 1 and number 5. Like that. Now let's return P1 plus P2. Now this will return 1 plus 5, so the result we will get now is 6, as you can see. And this is just all you need to create very basic functions in JavaScript. We will go more in depth about this later when we start working with React Native. But for now, that's all you need to know. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that and clear the console. Now we're gonna take a quick look at condition statements or conditional statements. Now, conditional statements are used to perform different actions based on different conditions. And there's three commonly used statements is the if statement, else if statement, and the else statement. It looks like this. I'm just going to type it all directly. If condition we can say execute if condition is true, else if condition 2, execute if condition is false and condition 2 is true. Then we can say else execute if condition, which is this one, and condition 2, which is this one, is false or false, like that. So now what this means is if the condition that's being passed to this statement is true, this code, whatever we specify here, will be executed. Now if this is false, the next thing that will happen, we will check if another condition is true. If this is true, this code will be executed instead. However, if this is false and this is false, it's going to go down to the else function, and then this code will be executed. Now we can check this out by just typing, let's say, if 1 equals to 1, console.log, first condition ran. Now, what we're gonna get now is the first condition will run, since 1 is equal to 1. Now let's say if 1 is equal to 5, execute this. This of course won't be executed. However, it will go down here and check if maybe 1 is equal to 1 instead. And then the second condition will run. So let's clear and run. As you can see now, the second condition is correct, so it will run. Now instead, let's say is equal to 4. Now this will as well return false. Let's say last condition run, since this is the last condition that it will run. And since both of these are false, this will run. However, if I would specify 1 is equal with 1 here, which is true, this will run. However, this will not run. So if I clear the console and type run, second condition ran, which is this condition. That's how to use conditional statement. And don't worry if it seems much, you get used to it pretty soon. Also, we're going to take a quick look at comparison operators. When assigning a value, you always use, let's say, the myName variable, for example. You always use equals to 1 equals sign, and then you give it a value. Now, if you want to compare something, let's say we want to compare myName to some other string. Let's say if my name equals with Doe, which is false. But if you want to compare something, it doesn't matter if it's a string, if it's an int or whatever it is, you're gonna use double equal signs. So now this is checking if my name equals with Doe. Clear the console now. This is false, so the second condition will run instead. It says this is true. Now we're gonna set this, just type false here, which means this is always false. So it will never run. Instead, let's check if my name equals with John. First condition will run, since my name is equal with John. Now we can also, it's going to clear the console and delete this. You can also take a look at how to use the smaller than or greater than comparison operators. Let's say if 1 is bigger than, this is the bigger than sign, is bigger than 5, execute this. Now, of course, 1 is not bigger than 5, so the last condition will run instead, since the second condition is false. However, let's say if 1 is smaller than 5, now the first condition will run. As you can see, the first condition ran, this condition. You can also use smaller than or equal to 5. Now this will run the first condition too. That's just a little bit how to use different comparison operators. Yes, the most important thing is you want to remember to use double signs to check if a value is equal to another value. Otherwise, you will assign it a value. Now you will assign number 5 to number 1, even though it's not a variable, but you get the idea. Now, instead of double signs, you can be extra sure by using triple signs. This does not only check if number 1 is equal to number 5. Let's change this to number 1. So now this is true. Now the triple equal signs means that if number 1 is equal to number 1, which is of course true, then it will also check if it's the same type. And the same type, I mean it can be an integer, a number, or it could be a string, for example. So this have to match on 2 different points. It has to be the same number, and also it have to be an int. So let's run now, and first condition ran. Now let's add parentheses around the second number, around the 1. And this will not be true anymore because this is now a string. So it's comparing number 1 to number 1, but it's also comparing the int 1 to the string 1, which is not the same data type. That's why it's returning false. So that's how we can use double signs and equal signs to create to compare variables or numbers. Now we're also going to take a look at using loops in JavaScript. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this. Now we're going to create 4 kinds of different loops. First one we create is a for loop. Then we will create a while loop. We'll also take a look at using a for each loop. And also we use something called map. Now we'll do the map function, the last thing we do. Now all of these loops basically do the same thing. I will show you. Let's start by creating the for loop. It's written like this: for variable I equals with 0. Now we're giving the I variable a value of 0. Now this is the first statement in the for loop, and the first statement is executed before the loop is ran. The second statement defines the conditions for running the loop. So let's say I is smaller than 10. This will run as long as I is smaller than 10. Right there. Now the third and last statement is executed each time after the loop has been executed. And when the loop has been executed, we want to increment I by 1. So I plus plus. And this will run the loop 10 times. Now or 9 times, let's console.log I, type clear. And as you can see, it gets run 9 times. If you want to run it 10 times, you have to do smaller than or equal to 10. So let's type run now. You can see the function is ran or iterated 10 times. Now these functions, these loops, are all used to iterate through a set of data and in some cases change or manipulate the data somehow. Example, if you want to loop through an array. I'm going to go ahead and clear the console. Now we're going to create a for loop instead. So let's create a new variable. We can call it I. I'm just going to comment out this one too as well. Set it equal, give it a value of 0. And we're going to say why I is smaller than 10. We want to do something. Let's console.log I. So this will do exactly the same thing as the for loop. Now, when it's done iterating one time, increment it. So let's press run. As you can see, it gets iterated 9 times, just as the for loop. Now we're going to take a look at the for each loop. Now for this, we're going to create an array. Create an array of just some random numbers, it doesn't matter, like that. And now we're going to use dot notation and for each. So numbers dot for each. We're going to call a function. Let's pass numbers parameter into the function. Like that. Now let's just console.log the number, which is the value. So all of these values will be console.log now and will be visible here. Oh, sorry, I forgot to uncomment that one. So now, as you can see, we're getting every number of this array with the for each function. Now we're going to take a look at using the map function, which is commonly used we're going to use it a lot in React Native later. The map function creates a new array with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. So I'm going to show you what that means. We can just copy this array. And I'm going to delete all of these now in the previous loops and clear the console. And we're going to create a map instead. So we got an array called numbers. Now we're going to create a new variable called doubles. And we're going to pass numbers.map because we're going to use the map function on the numbers. Create a function. We're going to pass x as a parameter. And we're going to return x. Let's return x and just multiply each number by 2. Like that. I'm just going to close up the function. And then we can finally console.log the doubles. Now what this will do, it will iterate through each value in the numbers array. It will then take the value and multiply it by 2. And then return a new array with the new values in the same order as the initial array. So as you can see now, when I'm console.logging the doubles array, which is the new returned array, we're getting 2, which is the double of 1, 10, 4, 12, 16. So it's a copy of this array with some modified values and returned as a completely new array. And this is used quite a lot in React Native. You will learn more about that later. Now we're going to take a quick look at JavaScript events. I'm just going to hit that clear. Also I'm going to check the HTML. I'm going to uncheck console and JavaScript. Instead I'm going to check output. So now we're going to take a look at JavaScript events. With JavaScript events, we can create functions that will be executed when, for example, clicking a button. And this is used a lot in React Native when, for example, clicking a button and you want to save something to a database or whatever. So we're gonna go ahead and let's create a new button. Let's just say click me, and let's say on click. So on click, when we're clicking this button, we want to call a function. So let's just call a function called doSome. Now we can go ahead and create that function right here in the body inside a script tag, like that. So now let's define a function doSome. This can be a really simple function. We can just alert you click the button. So now I'm going to click run with JS and click. As you can see, when we're clicking the button, the doSome function is called, and the doSome function alerts you click the button. Now let's say we get I'm going to delete the button. Let's say we get an input instead with a type of text, and we're going to create an onChange event instead. And onChange we want to call the same function doSome. And let's say instead inside the alert you changed the text. So now each time we change something in here, we will get an alert saying you changed the text. So if I type something here now I just have to click here to get JSPin to reload, but normally it will happen immediately. So we will get an alert anytime something changed. So if I change the input and click, we get you change the text. Now if I don't change anything and just click, nothing will happen because we didn't change anything. And now this onClick function and this onChange function is two commonly used event handlers in React Native that we also will use later. Now we're also going to take a look at the JavaScript classes. So you can go ahead and close down the HTML tab, also the output tab, and open up JavaScript and the console. So we're going to take a look at JavaScript classes. JavaScript classes was introduced in ECMAScript 6. And they provide a much simpler and cleaner syntax to create objects, and also it's a lot easier to deal with inheritance. We're gonna create a simple class. The syntax is like this: class followed by the class name. We can name this base, like that. Now the first thing you're gonna define inside the class is a constructor function. Now the constructor function will run every time this class is initialized. So just to try it out, let's set a property of this class. Let's call it name. We can call it base. And let's console.log. Let's say this.name plus, we're gonna add a string after the name, was initialized. So just to try it out, we can create a new instance of the class base. Let's create a variable called base and give it a new base class, like that. Now when I hit run, you can see base was initialized because that's what we told the constructor to do. So you will never call the actual constructor function in a class. Instead, you will they will run automatically. You can go ahead and remove this console.log. You can also define methods inside a class. Let's say, for example, you can create a method called getName. And we can make it return this .name. So now what we can do is use the console.log, and we want to use the base class. So base dot, and the method we want to use is getName. So hit run, and as you can see, we console logging the base, which is what we're returning in the getName function. Now you can also create static functions within a JavaScript class. So let's make this getName function a static function. Call it static getName, and we can just return, let's say, static function return a string, because that's what this is, a string. And now we can actually let's remove all of this. Now when using a static function, you don't have to initialize a new class or instantiate a new class. Instead, you can just use the class directly, base.getName, like that. Now this won't do nothing because we're not console logging it, but let's go ahead and type console.log base.getName, and it's going to clear the console, then hit run again. And as you can see, the static function was ran. Static function returned a string. So that's how you create a static function as well in a JavaScript class. Now let's take a look at inheritance, or extending the class. So we're gonna create a new class which is gonna extend the base class. You can call it, let's call it child, and add the extends keyword, and then the name of the class we want to extend, which is base. Now we're gonna pass a constructor to this class as well. We can pass the name right there from the base class, and to be able to access the name of the base class, we're gonna use super and then get the name. So what we can do in this constructor is, let's say, console.log this.name, just to see if we actually have access to the base class's name. Go ahead and just create a new instance of the child class. So var child equals with new child class. I'm just going to clear here and see what we got. As you can see now, the child function, or the child constructor, actually returns the name that we set in the base class as soon as it's initialized. So that's how you can inherit properties from an extended class. Now, of course, in this child class you can also define function or methods exactly as you did in the base class. So let's just create a normal function. We can call it getNumbers. Now we can return, let's say, an int 50, like that. So now we can just scroll down here, use the console.log to get some output, and we can say child, which is the class we want to get the getNumbers function from. So just console.log child.getNumbers, and this will return 50. And also the base name is console.log, as we say, telling it to console.log the name in the child constructor. So that's some basic also how to use JavaScript classes. And that's it for this JavaScript tutorial. This is some basic stuff you need to know to get started. So I hope you learned something, and we'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.